I'm Rachel Wimberly. I'm the Director of Adult Programs and Arts and Culture at Shalom Austin, and my colleague Annie is also in this meeting, and she's doing a lot of help behind the scenes. So if you have questions or you're having issues with tech or anything, we're kind of your two people. We are filming this.
I can't believe it's you. I'm sorry, with the beard.
We are filming this and shouldn't stress anybody out, but we just want to be able to share it on our Shalom Austin YouTube page later. So if you want to rewatch it, or you want to, hopefully you're so amazed that you want to share it afterwards, we can send that link out because we'll have everybody's email. Again, I mentioned Annie and I are here. We hope everything goes off without a hitch. I'm sure you've been in some Zoom meetings before, so if somebody freezes, we'll just take a second. If someone gets kicked out, you'll be able to come back in. Again, we're in a different world and we're as flexible as we can be. We're gonna start in a moment. We're gonna do sort of interview style because that's more fun, we think. I'm gonna ask questions, and what we're going to ask you all is Abby and I are going to chat, and she'll do a little reading, and then we're going to open it up for Q&A. So either jot down your questions while we're talking, we don't want to interrupt her, we're going to let her go through, or you can put them in the chat, and then we'll look at them when we open up for questions. So you can either jot them down in the Zoom chat, or you can write them down, and then we'll ask people to raise their hands. When we get started in just a second, I'm going to ask that everybody mute themselves, even when you're not talking. It just helps keep the quality a lot clearer, and then we'll unmute for Q&A, and Annie and I might help mute some of you if we need to. And before I introduce Abby, I just actually want to give a special shout out because I see Wendy Korn in this room. And I was thinking about this the other day. If Wendy Korn hadn't taken me to a New York Times program at the Atria where I got to meet Abby and I was so impressed, and then I stole her for Shalom Austin, we wouldn't be here right now. So thank you, Wendy, for introducing me to this amazing author and friend and just super amazing human. So I guess that's how I'll introduce Abby. I got to meet Abby through this amazing class she teaches and now teaches at Shalom Austin, and we're just thrilled that we have her. But today we're not going to be talking about the New York Times. We're going to be talking about her book, Shenanigans. And it's really about how this wife, mother, daughter became this very successful media watchdog. The book is great. It's really funny. And without further ado, I think we're going to start chatting about the book. Abby, do you want to add anything before I start with the questions?
I saw my sister for a minute there in Seattle, Washington, so I have to say hello to her. And I saw Winnie Freund, and I just need to say hello to these people. And all of you whom I haven't identified, I love you all, and I'm so happy that you're here. And if we do freeze, Rachel, that's okay. In Austin, if we freeze a little, that's fine.
And I was going to add one other piece as we get started. You can keep it on this, like many of you might have the Brady Bunch view on Zoom. If you also go up in the top right-hand corner, there's a thing where you can either do like speaker view or gallery view. If you do that, then you really will just kind of see mostly Abby and I talking. So just want to point that out, but you can keep it however you'd like. So I think I'm going to start with the big question that usually gets asked to authors first, which is, what inspired you to write this memoir?
It's a lot of different things. One thing was my late husband, because we did a lot of writing as a family. Not together, but Ken, his name was Ken, and Ken and I would go to poetry workshops for years and years. And I also went to programs to learn how to write essays and all sorts of things. And so that was one inspiration. Another inspiration was I just was very amused that I grew up to be somebody's wife, essentially. That was the message. That was really the message. And in the midst of that, I found myself ultimately in a job that was demanding and important in terms of the public, where I lived on Long Island. And I thought that was just terribly funny. And even when I started running the organization. It was called the Long Island Coalition for Fair Broadcasting. And the goal of it was to get the New York City television management to be more aware of their obligations to serve the community. So that was serious and important. And so I found it amusing to go from someone who had been brought up to get married to end up doing something that was important, not just to me and not just to my family, but was important to the community in which I lived. And I got to care about that a lot. So, but I thought it was a funny juxtaposition from someone who was brought up to be, get married and be charming and wear nice clothes, and then to all of a sudden be doing something that I cared more about than being charming and wearing nice clothes. So I would say the poetry, the writing, and my husband, who was always very positive about my work. That we'll get into that later a little bit more. So those are some of the things that inspired me to write the book.
I'm trying to decide if I want to follow up on that, or we're gonna come back to that because you have such a good story about like him kind of getting you going in that time. Something that is amazing to me in this book, and I don't know if this is like I don't know if social media and technology has broken my brain, but I just don't know that my memory is that good. And not only do you like remember standing there while your dad's shaving and all of these specifics, but you remember like the pattern on the landlady's dress and socks when y'all are like looking for that walk-up apartment. Can you talk about how you remembered all these things, or did you write them down at the time, or did they come to you in a writing exercise? Like how did you recount all of these various periods of your life so clearly?
I was writing them, as the lawyer said, who read the book for me, contemporaneously. That's her word. She said, "Did you write all this contemporaneously?" And I figured out what that probably meant. And I said, yes. So this is a composite of memories, and not only memories, but documentation of my life. I wrote about a lot of things that were very important to me, and I'd write them down then. But it was more than a diary. It was the quality of how I wrote it was very important. It wasn't, I just didn't dash off that I did this on that day. So I've been doing that for a long time, because the attorney asked me, she said, how did you remember? A number of people have said to me, how did you remember? Another woman who writes said to me, did you make that up? I said, no, I remembered it because I wrote about it. And then some things that my husband would say, I just remembered. I mean, I may have written them, but I just remembered some of the things he said. Like, I mentioned this to you, Rachel. I did a presentation of the New York Times at Atria, where we lived in Austin. And I turned to my husband after it was over and I said, was that okay? Did that go all right? And he said, oh, I remember him saying that.
When you talk about writing it down, like, I don't know about other people who are listening right now, but I often will write down a sort of a jot of what I did for the day, right? Or a little journal, or just so I don't forget. But when you were like writing these sort of as written pieces and including these details, was that just for the practice of writing, or did you have an idea that you would eventually put them together in a book? Or like, why were you doing that? What was the purpose?
I think that writing just made me feel good. The process of trying to write something down made it become clearer to me. There was one episode in our lives, which is not in the book, which my sons and I still laugh about. We were skiing, and we always took turns to the lead skier, where the three of us, the three kids and the mom and dad were skiing. The only one who loved skiing was my husband. We all did it, as the little kid said at one point when my husband announced he could no longer ski because his knees were bad. And the little kid went over and hugged him and he said, I only was in it for the hot chocolate. But we were up at a place in Vermont, and the rain and sleet was horizontal at that point. And as it would hit the snow, you would hear it bing, bing, bing. That's how icy the rainfall was. And it was the turn for the youngest child to lead off. And so my husband said, okay, Amos, you lead and we'll all come down and I'll sweep, which means he'll pick up the pieces of whoever didn't make it down. And so the oldest kid looked at my husband and said, Dad, I understand what you're doing and it is Amos's turn, but it's really inappropriate in these conditions for him to lead down. I should lead down or you should lead down, and then we'll all follow. And my husband looked at the three children. I put my head down because I knew that I didn't want to be there in any way. I didn't want to be there. And my husband said, I command this family. We'll proceed as I said. And the three sons stood there and then they started to laugh. And they laughed and laughed and laughed. And then Matthew said, we're not going to do that, Dad. That was the oldest kid. He said, we're just going to ski down and you follow. And the three kids went down and I just thought my husband was so angry. So I remember what he said. He exactly said, I command this family. And I know Ezra's here and Ezra can attest to that I command this family is something we continue to laugh about. So I looked at my husband and he was furious and his chin jutted out and he was just so angry that this was a rebellion. And we all skied down. Of course, the little kid kept falling and I kept saying, I don't want to do this. And we finally all got down there. And at which point the oldest kid unsnapped his ski boots and went over to my husband and hugged him really hard. And he said, Dad, I'll beat you in for lunch. And it was over. Incidentally, I've mentioned that story to a couple of other people, men who are, my age. And they say that they remember having that same kind of scene with their own father. It's a scene of a young man rebelling against his father. And one man told me that he said his father hit him, beat him. And he looked at his father and he said, you're not going to do that. You're not going to do that again, ever. So I don't know if that answers your question. But so yes. Some things are very memorable. Some things are very memorable.
Well, and because you shared that story that's not in the book, and I did see Ezra here, when you write a memoir, yours has your family in it, and then also some bigger names. Did you sort of check with them? Did you have discussions with them about what you would be sharing? And did the fact that these were all real people influence what you included and maybe what you didn't include? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's really interesting because when I started doing it, I was putting together many essays that had been done. And so I didn't really need guidance, but my dear late mom, who really wasn't so good in Motherhood 101, wasn't her strong thing. And my dear daughter-in-law, Ezra's wife, Amy, said to me, as I was putting it all together, and she knew I was writing the book, she said something to the effect, I don't remember her exact words, but it was something to the effect, don't be too hard on your mom because she's not living anymore. And I took that very seriously. And once in a while, I'd call my sister and say, does that sound right to you? My sister was very encouraging and said, it sounds fine, it sounds good. But when the manuscript was completed, I asked Ezra, I said, do you want to read it? And because it's about to go to the publisher, it's finished. And he said, no. I said, why not? He said, because I'm going to start telling you what's got to be different, and it's your book. and you shouldn't do that. And I thought that that was interesting that he said that. And my daughter-in-law, incidentally, at that point, when he said, no, I don't want to take it, I don't want to read it, it's your book, and I don't want to give you any suggestions. And my daughter-in-law said, I'll take it, I'll read it. And I said, great, and I gave her a copy of it. And then about 5 days later, I was talking to Ezra, and I said, has she started it yet? He said, yeah, she's read about 10 pages. I said, okay. And then about a week later, I said to Ezra, is she still reading it? He said, does she like it? He said, yeah, she likes it. She's reading it. And then about another week went by, and I didn't say anything to Amy because I didn't think that was fair. And then maybe another week went by, and then I said, when is she saying anything about it? And he said, she's liking it. She's liking it a lot. And then a short time later, she called me and she said, I love it. And it's wonderful. And it's an achievement. And I've sent it to my parents. And I thought that was a tremendous compliment. But I have to tell you something funny about Ezra. Last night, because I really didn't know what else to do, and I thought, well, I'll write a poem, because I really like working at the J. It's a lot of fun, and I love the people at the J. So I thought, I'll write a poem, in honor of the J. So I wrote, there is an old saw that you are what you eat. That may be true, since each one has her treat. The Aztecians glowed with mountains of chia, while chopped liver was king to the guys from Judea. So I thought, I'll let Ezra, I'll send it over to Ezra. And I sent it over to Ezra around 9:30, because he's my editor. And we fool around about the writing. So I sent it over to him, and he didn't answer. I figured, well, he must be asleep. And I went to sleep. And then this morning when I woke up, Ezra, this is my dear editor, he wrote back to me after midnight, and he said, I love this, I think it's so great. He said, needs tightening. First verse particular needs to work harder than merely stretching you are what you eat. Make the first and third lines rhyme, not just second and fourth. If you're saying you are what you eat, then the poem's characters should literally be what they ate. And I thought, after this meeting, I'm going to have an editorial conference with Ezra.
Part of the best part of this is watching him while you talk about sorry, Ezra. Actually, talking about the words that you choose and tightening and all of these things, how do you, I would assume that the pressure to decide what the title is hard. Like, how did you, were there titles you were debating? How did you pick this title? And why did you pick this title?
I chatted with my editor, Ezra, and I said I had I was very literary title, and it was old-fashioned. He said, nah, I didn't like that at all. And then he said, why don't you just, he gave me a great idea. He said, why don't you call it Media Michigas? And I thought that, Ezra's ideas are always good. I thought that's a really good idea. And then I thought, but this isn't just about media. It's about my family. It's about the world and how I see it, what I think is important. Oh, this is interesting. I just got on the screen, it said I had a phone call. I thought Media Michigas was just great, but it wasn't my book. And then I thought, I've got to do this myself, because he doesn't know what else is in the book. And so then I thought I liked the idea of Shenanigans and other media. And then I noticed that nowadays it's quite fashionable to just use one word. And I thought, all right, I'm not asking anyone. I'm naming it Shenanigans. And people love that. They love that title. And as a matter of fact, someone said, why did you choose that? And another answer is that the book is about courtship and government and media. There's a lot of shenanigans, or all three.
I think you're right. I agree. In the afterword, so you'll see where I'm going. In the afterword, you wrote, writing this story changed some of my other ideas. And you talked about sort of specifically, and I don't want to read the whole piece, but about what it changed. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because again, it's not a research piece necessarily or fiction, it's your memoir. So you already lived it. So what, were your big takeaways, or what do you think changed for you by writing it down or compiling it?
One of the things, my attitude toward my mother changed a bit, because I think I understand her more now than I did, because one of the things I did, which represented my desperation to get out of the house, was to lock my child in the car when I went for an interview because the babysitter didn't show up. And that, incidentally, I have spoken with a group, a book group in Kansas, and one of the women said, "I want to absolve you of your guilt." And I thought, I wonder what she's going to tell me about what she did with her kid. And she said that she lived in Europe, and it was very common in Europe in those days for people to leave people asleep, and young babies to leave them asleep in beds and tell the neighbor, if you hear any real screaming, stop in, I'll leave the door open. And she said she did that in Germany, and she did that, I think, in England, and it was really common, and it was considered okay. But what I thought about my mother was, if I had that urge to get out of the house and express myself and document my feelings and my perceptions, and my mother probably felt that a lot too. And she didn't have the advantage. My husband really encouraged me at every turn. When I would say, "What'll I do?" he would always say, "Do it, do it." As a matter of fact, those were his exact words for one job. He said, "Do it, do it, do it." And my dear father, it wasn't the era, and it wasn't his nature to say that to her. So I felt I understood her much more after I looked carefully at what made me function and what probably made my mother function or malfunction. So that changed a lot. And I think I appreciated some of my husband's, the other side of him, which was a very sensitive and artistic side. The fact that he would, every day before he went to work, we'd go walking out to the car, and he'd stop and he'd pick a lilac, or he'd pick a flower, or he'd pick mint and smell it. And even at the beach, he would pick Rosa rugosa, which is full of prickers. And he would always pick something and smell it and smile and hand it to me. And that side of him was very different from the side that says, "I command this family." So all of that changed a bit. And then also my thinking, and I've learned this just chatting with people who have read the book, my experiences are not unusual. People have this feeling, women have this feeling of loving their children and caring for their children, but having part of them that just wants to do something that represents them and takes them out of the house and out of the relationship of mother and wife.
I think a lot of women can identify with that. And as I'm actually, because I'm watching everybody in here, there's a lot of this happening when you're speaking, and even now. And we talk about the differences between sort of your era and your mother's era, but even at the time you talk about, and you and I have talked about, a mother of 3 having this career and this trajectory might not have been that common at that time. And you have this great familial support in your husband, which a lot of people might not have. Did you have a lot of peers? Like, did you have other working moms in your kind of position that you could talk to, or did you feel like you were living a very unique lifestyle?
Some of the women I talked to were way ahead of the game. A woman who was an attorney, and it just was never something that she thought about. she just did it. But I didn't spend a lot of time talking with other women about it because I didn't really have a lot of time between my kids and my work and my husband. And I kind of was, and with the writing, I was kind of busy. And I don't remember commiserating. I know Winnie and Gail are here and some others. I don't remember, it wasn't a subject really we talked about a lot, because I remember I talked to them a lot before I left the coalition, because I really didn't want to leave because it was so fulfilling. But I felt I'd really done it and I had achieved what I wanted to achieve. I was very frightened that I wouldn't know what else to do. That was something that bothered me for years and years. And it was very scary when I left it, and I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel happy until I got another job.
I'm going to ask this question, and I think it may lead into you wanting to read. It may not. So I'm just going to give you that caveat. So I don't want to steal your thunder if you want to read and then answer it. But your mom had specific aspirations for you. And I love it's just as easy to marry a rich schmo as a poor schmo in the book. That was maybe one of my favorite parts. Can you talk about sort of that dichotomy between the lifestyle, and even when your mom is with your husband and they're looking at the potential wedding venues, I think, I mean, you weren't married yet. And she said, I thought, Abby would marry somebody like that. And he just, it was this realization. Like, can you talk about kind of what she expected and what you did and that?
Yeah, that scene was very funny. My husband thought it was very funny, and he came back and told me about how funny it was. I mean, he just thought it was the funniest thing. They were in a very posh part of Connecticut in Southport, and driving along, and they saw this beautiful colonial home that had been a sea captain's home. It was one of the most beautiful sights in Southport. And this young man came out, a blonde, guy, and in the way he walked, he seemed to be in good shape. And he was wearing white pants and a bright green silk jacket, and he had a foulard scarf, ascot, and he had the matching foulard handkerchief in his breast pocket. And he came out and was walking along, and my mother and my future husband were driving along and had stopped to see the home and the beautiful beech tree in front of it, which is what Ken was looking at. My mother was looking at the home and then the man. And my mother turned to my husband, my future husband, and said, "That's the kind of man I always thought Abby would marry." And my husband started to laugh. He thought it was the funniest thing. And the more he laughed, the more angry my mother got. And I think that leads into the dinner. The dinner. I'm going to read a very brief portion of the book. What comes before it, well, now you know a little bit about my mom. And what comes before it is that Ken and I went and had dinner with Ken's mother, who was a widow and had lived in a modest home and was very, very religious, loved Judaism. I called her the Jewish Joan of Arc. She just was into it big time. And the Shabbos table was wonderful. I've never been in a family that had more than 2 Shabbos candles. My mother-in-law had 5. There were 5 brass candles, and she lit them all for Shabbos. And each one of us had a small challah, our own challah, which was braided, and she had, I guess it's melted butter on the top of it, and it was gleaming. It was so beautiful. And she was so happy because she loved Shabbos. And so it was very modest and lovely, a lovely experience for me, to some extent because of her joy, to see how much joy she got out of what she had done. Ken returned, so the next weekend, that's where this begins. Ken returned the next weekend for dinner at my parents' house. Mother had Rose, our family cook and friend, Prepare the usual golden chicken, baked crisp with orange juice and wedges of lemon, royal baby asparagus, and southern corn pudding. The table was set with fine crystal and silver. Dessert was a study in color, slices of pale green honeydew with scoops of raspberry sorbet and sprigs of mint served in tiny crystal bowls for each one of us. Daddy looked at Ken and said, "Welcome to the family. Let's drink to a happy and healthy life for the two of you." He raised his glass of white wine and expected us to do the same. After Ken touched glasses with Daddy, he stood and said in a loud, celebratory voice, "L'chaim, l'chaim. If we don't beat him, at least we'll tie him." Mother cringed at Ken's ebullient Yiddish accent, but Daddy chuckled because it reminded him of bygone days with his beloved grandfather. Daddy and Ken, both physicians and good-humored men, were very much at home with each other, and they proceeded to drink several glasses of wine and share Jewish jokes. "What's the difference between a schlemiel and a schlemazel?" asked Ken. "Well," Daddy answered, "a schlemiel drops a piece of toast on the floor butter side up, but a schlemazel drops a piece of toast on the floor butter side down." "Boys, boys," said Mother, "please, let's eat before the chicken gets cold." She was interrupting steadily increasing gaiety. "Dad, I have another one for you," said Ken, enjoying the boldness of the moment. "A schlemiel is somebody who spills his soup. A schlemazel is the guy it lands on." "I haven't heard that one before. Very good, Ken. More wine?" "Surely," said Ken. The wine was good, and Ken's Yiddish accent is getting thicker and louder. "Here's one you maybe never heard of. Feinstein comes home from a business trip to find that his wife has been fooling around. 'Who is it? That creep Epstein?' 'No,' says the wife. 'Was it that jerk Levy?' 'No,' says the wife. By now, Ken has stood up and assumed the role of Feinstein. 'I know, it must have been that idiot Jaime.' 'No,' says the wife. 'What's the matter?' Ken Feinstein yelled at the top of his Yiddish anger. 'None of my friends good enough for you?' Now it was crystal clear that Mother's dreams and Ken's energies were bilious together. I wasn't Ken on Keen's showing off either, but his jokes were funny and dinner otherwise would have been tense and stuffy. The meal went by quickly, with Ken singing a fine rendition of Tom Lehrer's Vatican Brag. "First you get down on your knees, fiddle with your rosaries, bow your head with great respect and genuflect, genuflect, genuflect." I thought that was funny. But by the time Ken yelled his last humdinger at the door, "Hey, Mabel, get off the table. The $2 is for the beer," I was relieved that he was leaving. We briefly kissed goodnight. He left to catch a train to Boston and work, and I went to sleep. I woke up at 2 a.m., consumed with the thought that a union of my mother's elegance and my fiance's crude comedy wasn't going to work. I didn't know what to do.
Thank you so much. We are going to open up for questions. I'm going to ask the first question just to get everybody a moment to get their thoughts together. Again, you can kind of raise your hand physically, and Annie and I'll try to, we have so many people, we're in 2 frames, so we'll just kind of try to make sure, or you can raise your hand via the Zoom feature, or if we're still not seeing you, you can type in your question. And I know we have some writers in here, so I know there may be some questions about the writing. I'm going to ask a writing question as well. Did writing the book, when you would write, did you feel energized or was it taxing? Were you almost exhausted post-writing, or were you on sort of a writing high?
I loved it. I was a writing high. I loved it. And and sometimes I have to say to myself, okay, now just leave it aside. and come back to it another day. And I've been trying to write a poem now based on a painting that a friend made, and it's hard for me to do it. So I keep putting it aside and going back to it. But I love the craft because it's very hard and it's demanding, and I love that challenge. I think it keeps me feeling young.
Do we have, I can ask questions all day, but now I do really want to open the floor. Do we have any questions from the audience? Scrolling back and forth. Okay. I'm going to come to Nancy.
Hello, Abby and Ezra. The book is pretty short, and I loved the length. I thought it was absolutely perfect. Was that hard to make that decision to make it short?
I just kept going until it was finished. I had no sense of whether it was long or short. I felt pretty exhausted by the hard. One of the hard things was the table of contents. It was really hard, and putting everything in order and then naming all the chapters, which I've done. I'm working right now on recording the whole thing, and so I'm glad it isn't longer. That wasn't a concern. It was the story that I wanted to tell, and I figured I was finished.
I think your gut was right.
Sherry, I think you had your hand up. I'm gonna ask you to, I'm sending you the unmute. There you go. Hold on, asking you to unmute.
Okay. Did it work?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. So, well, I just love your joy in it. That's so great. And did you cover your whole life or just certain portions of it? Because every memoir instruction book I've read said just one little part of your life. How did you deal with that?
I'm naturally rebellious, and I don't like anybody telling me what to do. And a couple of people said, read how to write a memoir. Screw them. I'm going to write. I'm going to write what I want to write. I'm not going to have anybody tell me, except Ezra, what I can write. And incidentally, I appreciated his forbearance very much. So I don't want anybody to tell me what to write or how to write or how long it should be. Not at all. That's not what writing is about. You should write what you believe. I suppose, I had two editors that I worked with, and they were wonderful. They've become very good friends of mine. But there were some things that they told me to do. Like one editor didn't get my sense of humor, and I realized that, and so I had to remember that. The other thing about my two editors, both of them really don't like their mothers, so I made a mental note that I had to be careful of that. But the one editor I wrote about my husband, I said one of the troubles with him was in conversation. He didn't take turns. It was always his turn. I said, one of the problems with him in conversation was that he didn't take turns, period. And then I wrote, it was always his turn, which I thought was funny. And she crossed out, it was always his turn. Because she said, you already said that. And I thought, she doesn't get my sense of humor. So I had to work around that. But the two editors were great because they were very different. One was very much into the shape of the whole thing. And she was very into woman's lib and she said, you left the home and it was so amazing. I didn't think it was so amazing. I just was lucky to have a husband who was very kind and very understanding of how I felt. I didn't give myself a lot of credit. I gave him a lot of credit. Because I always wondered, what would have happened if he had, instead of saying, well, get out of the house and do something you love. That's what he said. I wonder if he had said, well, work on your tennis game. I wonder what I would have done. And, go to Bloomingdale's, I don't know if that answers the question, but
It does a
I
lot.
like to be rebellious.
Where did you find your editors?
Oh, good question. The first editor, Amy, my daughter-in-law, she met her at a Planned Parenthood fundraiser. And, they said, hello, what do you do? Hello, what do you do? And this woman said, I'm a ghostwriter and an editor. And at that time, my husband, I think he was alive, and we had about 250 of his poems, and we wanted to put them together into a poetry book. And we had no idea how to do it. So we went to this editor and we said, what do we do with 200 pieces of poetry? And she said something which in retrospect is so damn simple, it blows my mind. She said, what you need to do is have little compartments. Put the poems about nature here, put the poems about aging here, put the poems about youth here, put the poems about humor here, and then we'll work on it. And I thought, that is so simple, but it had never occurred to me or the family. And we did that. And then, of course, she came back to me and she said, now choose the best in each section, which was difficult. So, but that was a wonderful piece of advice. The second editor also, I met her just through someone who also was a writer. And I talked to her on the phone and I liked her right away. And that was a year before I hired her. But I remember that she just sounded great. And so then I called her a year later and she didn't remember me. And I said, that's okay. And she had just a month. She said, I only have January, so I can work with you on January. And I thought, well, I'm going for it. And we worked from December 27th until January 30th or 31st. And that was it. So I was under a lot of pressure to get the book, to get it really the way it had to be. But she was kind. She went away to Mexico and I had a couple of questions for her and we emailed from Mexico. She answered. So one time she answered me in the airport of Mexico City. I had a question. She said, I'm in the airport, so I have time now.
That's cool.
Yeah. That's actually a great question that leads into a question we got in the chat from Irene. And I think a lot of it's just about some of this, the process of trying to get a book published. So did you self-publish? I kind of know the answer to this. Were you going to go on a book tour? And then of course we can talk about having a book come out during COVID. And did your son help put it into the form that is now? Did you need an agent? So I can remind you, those are a lot of questions, but can you talk a little bit about that process?
Yeah, first of all, no, Ezra didn't have anything to do with the shape, but the second editor did. The first editor was really into, that's so great that you got out of the house and talk about your relationships and all of that. And the second one was much more copy editor, talking about words and talking about the shape of it. And and it was great to have the two of them because they both gave me very different, they satisfied different needs in terms of getting the book together. The first editor, I asked her who I should go to publish it. And she suggested, one of the suggestions was Book Baby. I don't know if they're self-publishing or Book Baby is an agency. But I didn't like the names Book Baby. I thought, I don't want to have my book published by Book Baby. And then she gave me another name of someone. It was a publishing company, not a big fancy one, but one she knew of. So I sent them some of the book and they immediately wanted me to rewrite. Well, I'm rebellious and I don't like people telling me what to do. So I thought, and what they wanted was interesting. They liked part of it, but they wanted part of it rewritten. And I thought, I don't want to do this. I'm not interested in getting famous. I'm interested in getting this book out really for my children and my grandchildren and my friends. And I've changed a little bit. I've become a bit of a capitalist since the book is out. I want to sell it. But anyway, so my few experiences with people who were publishers, not famous big ones, was not good. They wanted me to rewrite stuff, and I was ready to go. So I self-published with a company, and I can talk to you more about that in private if you ever want to write me an email. And there's a downside to publishing it yourself. The upside is that nobody gives you any advice you have to take, and that's wonderful. The downside is that nobody will review your book because they say, did you publish it yourself? And if you say yes, no, because they don't, no, they're not going to, because they may think that it hasn't been seen by enough eyes. You know, if I were a big publisher, I don't know if I would be interested in reading things that were self-published. So, but I didn't learn that until later. I think had I known that, I might have tried, but the one attempt I did try with a publishing outfit, I didn't like working with them. I don't know if that answers your question, but I'm happy to talk with somebody on a one-to-one about self-publishing.
I've got more questions coming up in the chat, and then I just want to add this in case, and Abby mentioned this, before we end, I will try to pop it up in the chat, her email. But the other thing I'm going to do is, just because I actually have all your emails because you registered for this Zoom, we can send you a follow-up, and I'll just, because once the chat closes, you'll lose it, but I'll send you an email with Abby's contact information, which she's graciously agreed to share, and a link to the book, so that if you have those specific questions, you can reach out to her. So have no fear if your question does not get answered. Question we had in the chat: did you ever take a memoir writing class?
I did take a class oh, wait a minute. I did take a class where a number of African-American students and non-African-American students were in the class, and I found it very painful because some of the stories from the African-American women were so much less privileged than my own that it really made me heartsick. And incidentally, that was many, many years ago. And, but it wasn't really to write a memoir, but it was about recollections. But recently I took a poetry workshop course through Stony Brook in Long Island, in Southampton. And I've done that. I've been in that writers conference for about 10 years, 10 summers. And this course year it was Zoom, and there were a number of African-American women in the class. And because when you write in a class, if it goes well, you become very close and loving and respectful of your soul and their souls. So again, I found it very painful because, I mean, I know history. I know there was slavery. I know how slaves were treated. But when you share poetry with some young African-American women, you see a side of them that you don't necessarily see or get a chance to see all the time, especially if you live in a privileged kind of situation, which I do. So I've forgotten the question entirely. Oh, so I never took a memoir course per se, but I did take a couple of classes where people did record and share their memories and their hardships.
The next question, so you did answer that question. The next question: will your book be available in the Austin library system? How about an audiobook? And I thought maybe you could talk about a little bit about recording it too.
Yeah, well, first of all, I don't know about the library system because the Austin library is closed. But I believe that that'll happen. I know it has a ISBN number, and I know that it's in the local bookstores here because I brought it in. And you can get it on Amazon now, and you can get it at Barnes and Noble, and you can get it at local bookstores now. I'm recording the book now, and it's a wonderful experience. I'm working with a young man who is a musician, and so when I listen to the recording that I've done, and I think, can you stop it there? He said, I can stop it anywhere between sentences. We talk about how the language is music, and what makes part of the language more exciting is how you pause and let that moment fill with nothing and then move on to the next sentence. So we're having a great deal of fun recording, and I went through a scene where I got a Dear John letter, Dear Abby letter, and not the kind of Dear Abby letter advice, the kind of Dear Abby letter that, I'm walking away. And I said to him, you got to make it the pauses bigger. He said, oh yeah, I agree. And then he was making the pauses bigger, and then I'd say, pause there. And he would nod his head. He was facing the instruments he was working with, the recording instruments. And then after a while, he was ahead of me. He knew where I wanted to pause it. So the two of us were making music together through language. It was really an interesting experience. I'm enjoying it. We're not through. We have still a lot to do. I love it. It's good.
Do you ever want, I listen to a lot of audiobooks because I have a 6-month-old. So like sitting down and reading, like, what's that? And sometimes I wonder, when the author reads their own works, are you ever reading it and then you want to change a word? Like, do you want to change it, or do you stick exactly to what, in theory, you've got to stick exactly to the book, but do you ever have that feeling?
Not much. I see where one time I said dais and I meant podium. but the copy editor said to me, Abby, it won't be perfect. It won't be perfect. We kept trying, and she kept saying, don't worry about that, because we should have said dais, and I think we said podium. And then, of course, Ezra has pointed out two mistakes in terms of history. I said that the fellow who was the head of the radio station had CDs on his desk, and Ezra said they didn't have CDs then. And also the plane that I said Grumman produced for World War II was not right. I think I said it was the F-14 or 13, I don't know. So that was wrong. So those things are forever wrong. And then I had an attorney read it, because at one point, not I, but somebody said that Leslie Stahl was a bitch. And I was afraid. I didn't want to be sued by Leslie Stahl. What did I know? So I had an editor read it over, and a lawyer read it over, and she said, that's okay that somebody said she was a bitch, because it ends with her being very powerful and charming. And my attorney said, as long as you end up saying that she did a charming job in her presentation, she won't mind that you say she's a bitch. And then she said, do you want me to read any more of it? And I thought, I better have her read the book. And I did say something about the FCC guy at the end. I said, was he throwing out, because we went to visit the FCC guy, and Richard Kahn is here, and he was with me. Hi, Winnie, I see Winnie there. The FCC, the head of the FCC said, well, government can't help you. You need to talk with the general managers in New York. They're very clever people, and they'll be able to help you. And I detected a little smirk on his face, and I thought, and I wrote, is he throwing us to the dogs? And then I wrote another sentence that said, it figured. And the attorney told me to take out, it figured. And I wanted to leave it in. But at that point, I didn't want to have a conversation with the attorney. I just figured she was trying to do what I asked her to do, which is to protect me. So if she gives me that advice, I'm going to follow it. So I took that out. But when I've read it aloud, I've read, was he throwing us to the dogs? And then I've read, it figures. And then there was another thing where I said a guy, Ken looked at a boss of mine who turned out to be who's still alive. And if he read the book, or anybody who would read the book would know who we're talking about. But I was finished with my little news show and came out, and Ken was waiting for me. And he always said, "You were great, it was terrific." Every night he'd say, "It was great, it was terrific." And then the boss was coming through. And I said to Ken, "Oh, there's the guy, there's the big boss, he's coming through. What do you think?" And my husband frequently would, sort of squint and be figuring it. And he looked at me and he said, "Cold eyes." And the lawyer said, "Can you say something else?" So we changed it to something like tough. I don't know what we changed it to, but I'm sorry that I didn't leave it cold eyes, because that was Ken's reading of him, which I think was really very on target. But, I'm a human being, and human beings aren't perfect, and nothing they do, except maybe Leonardo da Vinci, is perfect, right?
Agreed. I want to be respectful of everybody's time. We're just about to hit an hour. And so do we have any last questions? I want to make sure I didn't miss anybody who has a burning question. Hold on, I got to scroll through the screens. Okay. So I'm going to ask one more question, but, and this is hard for an author to do, because I'm watching your faces and we're laughing when we should be laughing, because when Abby was reading, it was very funny, but she can only hear me or one other person. So this is a lot harder to do, I think, as an author, because you don't get the same audience. So I just want to give a huge thanks to Abby for sharing her experiences and her book with us. I think you're such a gem. And just a reminder, we'll have this on the Shalom Austin YouTube page. I might actually wait a day or so to send y'all the follow-up email so I can put that link in there, because I have to wait on marketing. I already put Abby's email in the chat. Again, I'll do that in the follow-up as well. And I'm not in any way telling you where to buy the book. The easiest link for me to share was the one on Amazon, but you could go to a local bookstore. So sharing that. And the last question, wait, did Abby disappear? No, there you are. Okay, sorry, I have so many people on my screen. I guess my question is, because I can tell we have a lot of writers in here and there were a lot of writing questions. It seems like you took the leap seemingly pretty easy, but maybe not. Maybe there was a lot of am I really going to publish this? But what is your advice to writers or people who may want to do the same thing, but just can't get started? What would you say to people?
I'd quote my husband: "Do it, do it, do it." It's really great. It's satisfying. It's interesting. You learn more about yourself. You pay more attention to the world around you and the people around you. It's a very satisfying, tough, satisfying exercise. But it makes life more meaningful and deeper. And do it, do it, do it.
I don't think we can end in any better of a fashion. So I just want to thank everyone for attending. Again, amazing job, Abby. Follow up if you have questions with her. You can always reach out to Annie and I. And we're just so happy that everybody was able to join us today for this very special program.